What's up everyone, welcome back here to the Mega Moose channel. Thank you so much for tuning in today. In today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about my very first craft show experience, but also share with you guys some of the lessons that I learned and took away from that experience. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. So before we get started in the video, I wanted to give a little bit of a background as to why I decided to sign up for this craft show event. A few months ago, I decided to open my very own Etsy shop because I started making my own handmade mouse ear headbands, and I really enjoyed getting to open the shop and sell them online, but I wanted to see what it would be like to do an in-person selling event, and so I was looking through Facebook at all of the events coming up around my area, and I saw this craft show that was right down the road from where I'm currently living. So I checked out the event in a little bit more detail, and I realized that they hadn't accepted any vendors yet, so I decided to sign myself up as a good learning experience and just see what it would be like to do an in-person selling event. So I was super excited whenever I found out that I was able to have a table at the event and that I was going to actually be able to participate in this craft show. So as soon as I signed up, I knew that that is when all of the preparation was begin. So when I signed up, I had about a month and a half until the event actually took place. I signed up towards the middle of September, and then it was going to take place at the end of November. And as soon as I started prepping for the event, I hit my first realization about craft shows, and I had my first lessons learned. You see, it's definitely self-explanatory, but at the time it did not hit me that if you want to participate in an in-person selling event, you have to have product in order to sell at an in-person selling event. So essentially, if you want to sell in person, you have to have enough items to be able to be available and ready to actually sell in person. Now, it's important to note that since I was still very new at my Etsy shop and still new at making these mouse ears, my current manufacturing process was that I was just testing out materials, making a few designs, and as soon as I made them, I would put them up on my shop to be sold. So I really didn't have a lot of items ready and on hand at the time. I really just had the ones that I was experimenting and making, and had a few on my shop, and then if one was purchased and I ran out of it, I was able to make it pretty quickly in the evening and then have it shipped out the next day. But I realized very quickly once prepping for the craft show that I was going to have to make a bunch of ears in order to actually have them ready to be sold at the craft show event. So once I realized this, I set some goals for myself so that way I would be able to actually be diligent about making product leading up to the actual event. So I set this huge lofty goal for myself that I was going to make 100 ears for the event to actually be sold at. So at the time that I set that goal, I really didn't think that was too many ears at all until I actually started making them and realizing how long they actually took me. It takes me about a half hour to make a pair of ears, and I tried to make them in bulk and do all of these things, and I quickly became very, very stressed out and anxious about actually completing this goal and seeing if I would actually even have any items ready to be made at the craft show. So it got to be around the middle of October whenever I was prepping for the event. I was about a month into preparation, and since I still work a full-time job, I would work the whole day, and then as soon as I got done with work, I would immediately start making ears. And towards the beginning of my prep for the craft show, I really actually was having a lot of fun and a good time making these ears and trying to come up with new designs since the holidays were coming up, but also recreating some ones that I already had, and I was making them. I figured out that it was really efficient for me to make them in bulk, so I'd make a bunch at a time, and every evening I would try to make as many ears as I could. I was really putting a ton of pressure on myself to try to get all of these ears made, and ultimately it was really just burning myself out and really pushing myself to the limit, and I found that I wasn't actually even enjoying the process at all, and I was actually starting to dread the idea of participating in the craft show. So as soon as I started feeling that way, I knew that I needed to take a step back for a minute and start to reorganize my thoughts and my planning as I went into this craft show. Because ultimately this was supposed to be something that was fun for me to participate in and a good learning experience, and I knew that if I kept pushing myself to this limit, it wasn't going to be for me to keep producing the ears in this way, and two, I was going to start to get really burnt out and honestly not even want to make them in general anymore. So I went back to my goals and I decided to redefine my goals list from 100 ears down to about 50 ears, and I decided to take a week off from making ears and instead focus on things like my table setting and all of the logistics that were going to go into actually planning and participating in the event. So that was my first lessons learned, is just to set realistic goals whenever I go into a new experience or something new that I'm participating in, because if I try to not pace myself and try to push myself to the limit, I might get burnt out and not want to participate in the thing anyway, and then I won't actually know if it is something that I enjoyed fully or not. So that's one of my recommendations for you if you're planning on participating in your first craft show, and if you're just starting out doing these crafts, or if you've done it for a while but don't necessarily have a lot of product on hand. Definitely pace yourself, plan accordingly, and definitely make your product leading up to the event, but just have grace with yourself and know that it's not going to be perfect the first time. The second lesson that I learned since participating in the craft show is that when you're starting to make a new item or craft to sell at a craft show or to sell in general, make sure that when you try a new method, that the method actually works before actually selling or making the items in bulk. And I'm definitely going to elaborate on this a little bit, and I definitely learned the hard way whenever it came to making the scrunchies that I was planning on selling at the craft show. So I wasn't originally planning on selling scrunchies at all, but I had gotten a sewing machine in the middle of preparing for this craft show, and I wanted to learn how to sew, and I decided to do that through making scrunchies. And so I had made these scrunchies and I was trying to figure out a new way of making them quicker than I already was. And in doing that, I was using an elastic that I thought was going to work for the scrunchies, but ultimately did not work at all. And this was super frustrating because, like I said earlier, I found out that it was really good for me and efficient of me to make all of my items in bulk. And so I was making all of these scrunchies, preparing all of them with this elastic, and they ultimately did not work. I had a huge box of all of these scrunchies prepped and ready for the event, and I was even selling some to customers on my Etsy shop to see how they were working out and to see if anybody would even want to purchase any in general. And so I had a few sales on my Etsy shop, but then got a couple responses talking about how a lot of their scrunchies had actually broken. I got reviews and comments saying that the elastic had snapped and that the scrunchies weren't able to be used anymore, and this was a super discouraging thing for me. I was getting super frustrated because this was in the middle of my starting to get a little bit burnout from making the ears. I was making scrunchies, just working really hard in the evenings to get a lot of product made for the event. And that was a point whenever I was really questioning my decision of signing up for this event, if I was even ready for it, or if it's something that I was going to even do well at. And like I said, I was super frustrated because I didn't know if I was even going to be able to sell these scrunchies in general, and I had just put a ton of work into trying to bulk make a ton of them. But it ended up being a super good lessons learned, and I really learned from my mistake, knowing that if I'm trying to make something new, I should make one prototype and make sure that it works before actually making them in bulk or selling them to a bunch of people. So that's my second recommendation for you. If you're trying to make your process more efficient or cut back on time, make sure that it's something that's going to actually work and set yourself up for success rather than failure, so that way you don't get discouraged and frustrated like me. The third lesson that I learned is to not compare myself to other vendors that are participating in the craft show. This definitely sounds like a funnier lesson that I learned, but I think it is important to keep in mind if you are participating in your first craft show event. The craft show officially opened at 9 in the morning, and as soon as the time had started, people began swarming in. And I noticed that a lot of the other vendors were getting a ton of action and ton of customers towards their tables, and the day was definitely slow for me to begin with. A ton of people were walking by, a ton of people were interacting with me, but I wasn't having any sales, and I noticed that a lot of people around me were having a ton of sales and they were having a lot of customers come to their table. So I definitely had my doubts toward the beginning of the day. I was thinking, is this something that I should have even signed up for? Am I going to make any sales during the day? I was really questioning my decision in actually being at the craft show. But then I tried to remind myself that this was the first time I was participating in a craft show. My table looked great. I was really excited about it, and I was happy that I had the help putting it together. But there were definitely other vendors around there that you could tell were seasoned craft show sellers and had definitely done this before. The people across from us were selling soap, and their table looked amazing, but I had to remind myself that you could tell that they had done this before, and this is something that they weren't new at, and they had it down, and they knew how to sell their product at a craft show. So even though that I was selling soap at my table, that wasn't the primary reason why I was actually at the craft show. I was there for the sole purpose of trying to sell my ears and gain more exposure for my Etsy shop. And I had to keep in mind that it was still the beginning of the day, and that everybody's journey is different in that it was my first time and it definitely was not going to be perfect. And I think this is very applicable to anything new that you start in life. If you're starting something new and you're looking at somebody who has been doing it for a while and seeing how successful they are at it, that really doesn't set you up for success because you're just comparing yourself to somebody else's journey. Even though you're starting at the beginning, you're comparing yourself to somebody else's middle. And this might be getting a little bit off track, but I think it's definitely applicable to what I was feeling at the craft show. So again, I had to have grace with myself and I had to remind myself that this was supposed to be a fun, enjoyable experience. It was my first time doing it, and I didn't want to compare myself to anybody else that had already been doing this before, and keeping in mind that, like I said, it was my first time and I was there to sell my ears. I was looking around at all of the other vendors participating in the craft show and I was comparing myself and my products to their products, which really didn't make sense at all because what I was selling was very different from what they were selling. And I was coming into it as this being my very first time selling at the craft show when they had probably been doing it a couple of times before, and it definitely was not their first time. So all that to say, whenever you participate in your first craft show, don't worry about how everything else is going around you and don't compare yourself to the other vendors. Just have a great time with it and know that it is your first time and just have some grace with yourself. So this video was centered around a lot of the lessons that I learned at the craft show, and it might have sounded like I had a really negative experience either leading up to or actually at the craft show, but I definitely don't think that. And I definitely didn't want to try to make it seem like I had a negative time or that I regretted signing up for the event. Just wanted to talk about some of the things that I learned and how I plan on moving forward if I decide to participate in a craft show again. This video might seem a little bit scattered, and it's because I'm still trying to reflect over my experience participating in the craft show, but all in all, I am really thankful that I did sign up for the craft show and that I actually decided to participate in one. Now moving forward, I now know how I want to prep products if I decide to participate in a craft show again, how I want to lay out my table and actually work the event, and I have a lot better of a mindset going into my next time participating in a craft show if I decide to do it again in the future. So thanks so much for watching today. I hope you were able to get something useful out of this video, even if you aren't planning on participating in a craft show or trying to sell some type of product. Maybe you got some information that you can apply to your life and maybe find helpful. If you're watching this and you're planning on prepping for a craft show, or if you've experienced one before, definitely leave me a comment in the comment section and let me know about an experience that you had and some major lessons learned that you had taken away from the experience. But thanks so much again for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed what you watched today, and I appreciate you following along in my craft show journey and experience, and I plan on keeping you posted if I ever decide to participate in one again. So thanks so much again for tuning in today, guys, and we will see you in the next video. See ya!